Hello and welcome to the Cosmos Safari podcast. I'm your host, Dave Farina. In today's episode, we're going to be talking all things astronomy outreach with my guest, Kevin LeGore. Kevin is a pillar of our community. He has worked throughout the industry in many of the brands that you may have heard of. And he also has his own business called Focus Astronomy Outreach, where he brings the universe to the public for educational purposes, as well as to private events as entertainment. So I'm really excited to bring Kevin on and to help you to understand how outreach is done, how to get involved, and maybe do some of this stuff in your community. So enjoy as we talk to Kevin LeGore. Kevin, thank you so much for joining me today. I met you a few times at NEAF, and it's great to have you here on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Kevin, I know your background in telescopes is pretty vast. You guys probably know Kevin LeGore. He's a pretty prominent figure in the astronomy world. What we hope to talk to Kevin about today is more about outreach and how sharing our love and our passion for astronomy is something that both Kevin and I have in common, but that we have different experiences that we are coming from, and hopefully throughout our discussion today, you can glean some kind of takeaways from this in your own efforts to do outreach as well. So Kevin, could you just give us some background on kind of like what got you into astronomy in the first place?
So my mom got me a small 50 millimeter refractor from the Discovery store, which was owned by Discovery Channel, in 1999 on a whim. Just was like, hey, this might be cool, as I think a lot of parents do with a young kid. It's like, what could I gift them that's just different and it's not the same stuff? So that's kind of where that started. And it took a couple years for, I think, the interest to really click in. I still have that scope laying around somewhere.
Awesome.
In pieces, but the tube is around here somewhere.
Now, is that because you took it apart to try to figure out how it works?
I lost the mount, and I lost as you do when you're a kid and don't pay attention to anything. So I started viewing the moon, and then probably wasn't until a few years later, probably once I got into like middle school, we started talking about space, that my interest kind of peaked further, and I wanted to start getting into the hobby on a heavier basis. So I started saving up to get a little 6-inch Newtonian, and then got that. And then, that's where it took off. Got involved with a local astronomy group. They did events like I do. So I started jumping right in with outreach, and it was really kind of like trial by fire in a way, because astronomy events will do that to you, where you just have to jump in and there's 50 people in line and they want to know what you're looking at. And that's where my interest in outreach got started. I started volunteering at a space museum that's unfortunately no longer in business out here. And that's where I met the group I have been working with for a couple decades at this point. And then COVID hit, and they decided to close up their business. And then I was already running Focus. Focus started in 2011, and when I lived out in LA, working for Woodland Hills Camera, and then eventually moving to Skywatcher, was doing my own stuff out there. And then when I came back to Arizona in 2016, I started heavily trying to dig into the outreach areas out here. And then, like I said, then COVID hit, everyone went on this hiatus. And then my buddy never returned to doing events. He retired. And so I started picking them up. And that's what I do now as a side gig. So I do outreach and corporate events, which are two different animals that we can dig into. But that's how I got started.
That's awesome. Yeah. So my background, as a kid, I remember wanting a telescope. I remember looking at it in, when they had the science stores in the mall, where I could look at it through the window and be like, wow, that's an awesome telescope. My dad kind of talked about getting one. We never did. And kind of fell off my radar for a while. And I actually started really getting into it in my 20s, which was directly related to my job running a planetarium. So
Oh,
that was
nice.
like late in life. And there was always astronomy there. Earth and space science was always there. But I ended up having to teach myself a lot of this stuff. And just like you, I ended up joining a local astronomy club. So,
Hmm.
I think a lot of our audience here on Cosmos Safari podcasts are interested in astronomy, and the degree to which their interest is, I think it ranges fairly wide. So, what would you say to people who are just starting to get interested? That maybe are starting with a telescope, they'd like to do outreach, but it's kind of scary.
Yeah, that happens a lot. We have people all the time. They're like, "Hey, I have a telescope. This is kind of neat." They're just kind of looking for some way to get involved. And I remember being that way too.
Right.
Astronomy is kind of a funny hobby where it seems so unobtainable, but the minute that you crack the ice and realize, oh, there's clubs and stuff all over that, like it's super easy to get involved in the community, but you got to find it, and
Sure.
it's not one of those things that you hear about all the time. So yeah, I would say find a local group and get involved. Um, I would also say if you're just getting started, it's very easy to shy away from doing events. I've had people show up. My team and myself, we've been doing this for a couple of decades. So we're pretty entrenched with the gear that we have. And a lot of our gear is large and impressive stuff. And we get people who come out and they're like, well, my scope's not going to be like yours. It doesn't have to be. And
Nope.
quite honestly, I don't want you to have the same thing. Um, there's something really refreshing about having someone who's just beginning out doing astronomy, because when you have people attending an event, like, wow, this scope's amazing. How much is it? Must
Sure.
cost $1 million, the typical stuff. Um, and yeah, there's a fair amount invested. I mean, we're not really there to talk money, but it's nice to have someone who's new, who's just getting started, because it shows to people how obtainable it is
Yeah.
to get involved. And maybe, hey, I have one gentleman who comes out. He came to one of our telescope help classes that we do usually at the beginning of the year, had no idea what to get. Came out to a class. We just did the basics of this is a Schmidt, this is a reflector, this is a refractor. Came in, took a bunch of notes, and he ended up buying a Celestron 6 SE, which is probably one of our most
Perfect.
recommended scopes. Now he's out whenever he's available. And yeah, it's not the
Right behind me.
biggest, most impressive scope. Yeah, they're everywhere. And maybe it's not the biggest, most impressive scope we have on the field, but he's there. He's passionate. He's sharing his interests, and the views are great. And no one's complaining about it. So you don't have
No.
to have this big bad gear. You don't even have to know what you're really doing. And that's part of the good thing of coming out to these events and joining a team is a lot of times we all didn't start that way either. I remember my first astronomy event vividly. My 6-inch Newtonian was on an equatorial mount. I had no idea which way to put an equatorial mount. I just popped it somewhere, and they had to come in and show me how to manage it, and I just stuck to a relatively simple target. They even gave me some pointers, like here's something cool, it's this far. And for 2 hours at an outreach event, I don't remember what the target was, maybe it was the ring or something easy. I just stood on that and talked about it, and that ingrains it in your head, and you do that over and over and over, and eventually you get pretty good at it.
So tell us a little bit more about what your company, Focus Astronomy Outreach, does.
So Focus started as a volunteer program, which I would say that's where you got to start. So I'm not a big fan of astronomy clubs, and it has nothing to do with the club. It's just I find that what I want to do is just outreach. I want to go out and share. And there's a lot of clubs that do that, but a lot of times it can get political and be like, well, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. So I didn't need anybody dictating what I wanted to do. I had a vision and that's what I wanted to execute. Um, so my focus, no pun intended, was that. Um, so Focus started as a volunteer program. Um, which was basically just me and whoever wanted to come out and share stuff. There wasn't any money involved, nothing. It was just my own whim. And you start doing a bunch of events and building them up. And over time, a few years ago, it got to the point where I had to make a decision on which direction focus was going to go. And I've seen this happen with a couple different groups, because at some point, if you want to keep doing outreach, whether it's schools or whatever, you're going to have to start carrying liability insurance.
Yes.
Which
Yep.
most schools and most resorts, that's $2 million plus policy to set foot. Now you're not paying 2 million, but that's what you have to carry. That's a few grand out of your pocket.
Wow.
So a lot of astronomy clubs have that. So that's kind of the benefit of being under a club, is someone else is taking care of the insurance. I think NASA
Hopefully.
solar system ambassadors are the same way. They're under this umbrella policy with NASA, I believe.
Correct. Yes.
Which is great. But if you're doing your own thing, you have to go through all the work yourself. So I'm out of pocket, we'll just say almost $3,000 right at the beginning of the year. I can't carry that. So
Sure.
That's where I had to make a decision. It's like, am I going to become a nonprofit and raise money to pay this stuff? Or do I become a business? And I had to talk to a few financial experts. Some friends of mine are attorneys and financial people. And they pointed me in the direction of doing business. And the reason I chose a business was I could pick and choose which events I was going to charge and which I weren't. And I could say, this is a volunteer event and there's no money transferred, or it's a paid event. And we've gotten flack before. I did an episode on our What's Up webcast for Skywatcher about this topic. And we get some flack that, oh, you're charging for astronomy events. That's a very capitalistic approach. It's like, well, yes and no, because for a long time I was very like, you shouldn't trade money for events. But over time, it becomes pretty prominent that if you want to grow your program and offer cool new things and do literally anything, you have to have money to back it. And is that money going to come from donations? Is it going to come from charging events? Where's the money coming from? Because a lot of us, including myself, could probably say, I don't have that kind of income that I could just throw thousands of dollars to the side to keep this going. So at some point you become big enough to where you have to make the decision of, okay, I have to have insurance to go to a school or whatever. I can't keep doing this because you're hitting the ceiling. You have to make that decision of, how am I going to do this? Because an insurance company, when you approach them, they're not just going to be like, oh, you're a person, we'll insure you. They're like, well, what are you? You need to either be a business.
That's kind of where Cosmos Safari got to. Mm-hmm. So I was teaching primarily. It was the main way I got into it. I joined the local astronomy club. I did 6 years as president of the local astronomy club. We did tons of outreach events. I very much enjoyed it. I got lots of experience and lots of education from my group that I worked with. I owe everything to them. But, I have a small family, or now a growing family now.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, 6 years ago now, I had to make that decision. Do I want to continue to do the outreach, neglecting my responsibilities as a parent? This is pre-COVID. And do I want to do all of this outreach for nothing? Or do I just start a YouTube channel? I didn't even think about money. I just thought, do I start a YouTube channel and hopefully impact, approximately the same number of people when I do my outreach? It's just digital outreach. And it became a thing, and it wasn't planned. It certainly wasn't ever meant to be a business until it kind of, you said, got to the point where I started to realize, like, if I want to keep doing this, there are some things that I need to be able to handle financially, like the podcast, right? Like we're on right now. I'm funded by our Patreon patrons, so I'll put that plug right there. That's what keeps the lights on, and allows us to talk with you today, because what software we use to do the podcasting isn't free. And so absolutely, completely get this. Um, and I appreciate all of the effort that you put into what you do, because that's why we're talking today, because you stand out from the crowd. And
I
I think
appreciate
the
it
work
being
that you do
on.
is awesome. And I'm interested to learn from you.
Yeah, I've had a lot of people. There's a lot of people that still help me today that you'll never see on a webcast episode. That's just not their style.
Right.
They
Yep.
don't get nearly the praise that they've done, but I have a whole second family that has helped me over the years and still helps me. And I try to give back to them as much as possible. But I could not be where I'm at without the people in front of me. I think it's Isaac Newton's quote where you have to stand on the shoulders of giants to get where you're going. And that's how I feel about a lot of these people. Um, Even when I was younger, I never gravitated to people my age. I gravitated to older people just because I resonated more
Yep.
with them. Maybe it's the old soul kind of thing. All my friends are older than I am, and that's
Same
what
here.
I've always known. Maybe it's kept me out of trouble at the same time, but
I can't say
um,
the same about that.
but yeah, it's I have a lot of people to thank every day. They're out helping or doing supporting me in whatever way, shape, and form.
So, kind of in that same thread, you said you have people that are your support system in the background. Um, I think it's important for people who are kind of like where you're at, where you're very much a pillar of the community at this point. When have you experienced failure? How have you learned about it? And can you give us some examples of where that failure occurred and you had to figure out how to kind of push through it and what that looks like? Because I think a lot of people are probably, as they're getting started, feeling that learning curve. I know I felt it, and it's sometimes difficult. And I even get it now. It's not even necessarily just a learning curve that's for newbies. It's a learning curve for people just to maintain and keep up, because it's moving so fast. So can you just
Mm-hmm.
give us some examples of where you failed and how you came about getting through it?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest. I was watching a podcast yesterday. I don't even know who it was, but it was like a psychologist or something like that, where Um, I think in their terms, it was just a random thing on YouTube, but their terms, they were talking about like addiction. But it kind of resonated on like you're saying with failure, where if you try to overcome whatever the issue was as a whole, you'll never get it done. So he talks about lowering the bar, and not in a negative way, but you have to lower it to where it's achievable for you. Um, and then it's just stair steps where you hit this goal, then this goal, then this goal, then this goal, and it just progresses. Um, Failure, though, you got to be willing to take no as an answer, and you're going to get a lot of people that say no. And I learned that early on, and my internal motto is the worst thing they're going to say is no. So if you
Yep.
need someone to back you, ask. Some of these companies are willing to back people and maybe donate equipment if they're in the position, but be highly aware that they're probably going to tell you no. Um, so those are like little failures at that point. What are some other
When you say
failures?
you're saying like people who you're looking to do outreach with, or
Oh no, this is when I was early on. I had visions of what I wanted to do, and I needed the equipment to do it.
got it? Okay.
So I needed to go ask companies to support me with equipment, and a lot of them said no,
Understood.
because
Yeah.
you're gonna being on the other side of it now. If you ask us, we need like a resume or a portfolio of why are we gonna cut money and give you
Sure.
equipment, and I need to make sure you're not just gonna flip it and do all that kind of stuff. So
Right.
when you're getting started, a lot of people are gonna tell you no. So that's an early failure kind of a thing, is you have to be willing to just accept no and then go find another place and keep trying. um I will say, getting to where I am, going on a more personal level, which I haven't actually talked about in depth publicly other than within the people who know me, but eventually you put so much effort into something that it can take away from other important things in your life. So I got divorced in 2022, and
Wow.
looking back, it wasn't smooth sailing, but it could have been way worse at the same time. And there's a lot that came from that, and you have to reflect on, it's a two-way street with something like that. And you kind of have to take inventory of like, what did I do to get myself here? And maybe I focused too much on doing this. There was a lot of other things that happened, which I'm not going to get into details about, but
Sure.
um, I could see where it's like, maybe I put too much effort into this career and I wasn't present in this, and this. And because you have to remember, when you're out doing events, that's your time. You are making a decision to put time into this. But what other things could you be doing with that time? Are you a parent that your kids needed to be there? Does your spouse need you to be there? You're investing your time, and that comes at a price somewhere. So maybe you're
Absolutely.
retired and you've got tons of time. But so failure wise, I think that I don't know if I would make that a full failure, but I could see bits and pieces where I spent a lot of time hyper focused on a particular goal, and maybe I wasn't present to where I needed to be present in certain aspects of my personal life at that point. And I think that happens with a lot of people who are very driven and targeted on what they're trying to achieve, is sometimes you can't rattle yourself loose from that.
And I think I can say this with some level of confidence that this particular hobby tends to be attractive to people who have similar personalities to what you're describing, right? Like I think a lot
Yeah.
of us are very hyper focused on that, and perfectionism is a thing that we all struggle with. Maybe not all of us, but I certainly do. And yeah, I have the same kind of things. Mrs. Cosmos Safari is in the background right now,
Yeah.
somewhere with my kids, making sure that we can do this here today. So here's my plug. Thank you for that. Like it does take away time, and but we believe in what we're doing here, and that's why we're so
Mm-hmm.
passionate about it. So thank you for sharing that, though. I mean, that's very meaningful to the podcast, that we can be so open. We had talked a little bit about, when you are trying to organize outreach, right? You said the very different animals between public and like educational type of star watches versus these corporate events that you do. Can you
Mm-hmm.
kind of like, I'd like to steer mostly on the side of the education stuff today, but
Yeah.
could you just touch on that other aspect of it too? Because it's foreign to me. The outreach part for the education is where I'm kind of comfortable with, but I'd just like to hear about, how do you prepare?
Yeah, so usually you know, I'll get an email from someone. I don't throw my phone number out there. I just like having a digital track of everything. Once I've got connected with whoever I'm going to work with, then I'm not secretive about my phone number about it. It's just I like to have that initial, hey, let's look back and see what we were talking about kind of thing, track records. Um, so normally I'll get an email from somebody, whether it be an educator or an event planner or whatever. They start out pretty much the same way. It's an event request. And usually it's like, hey, I heard from an event planner, or we saw you at this event, or whatever. Somehow they found us. And then from there, usually it's okay, what dates are you looking for? What time of year? Usually we're trying to figure out how many, the big things that you want to figure out when organizing an event are how many people, roughly the date and times, and maybe what the goals are. And a lot of times with like a school or something like that, more public, it's a little bit more loose. So it's like, okay, I'll look at the calendar being like, well, we'd like something in March.
Yep.
Okay, fine. Well, let's do something on this day. I try to pick a little bit of a moon for the public because it just looks good. Um, and then I'll tell them what the available best times for viewing are, and then ask if that works. Sometimes they approach you and they've got a lot more structure, like science nights at a school or a museum. there's more structure that's laid down, like, hey, we start at this time, we end at this time, and you just kind of insert inside of the framework they've already built. Um, and then from there, I kind of figure out what do we need to bring for equipment. Usually I figure out, we've kind of figured over the years that you need about one scope for per 50 people. That way you're not
Wow.
waiting in lines all this time. But it also depends, is there other activities going on? Like a museum, it's like, oh, well, we have this activity and we have this and this. So they're not all just around the telescopes. Some events they are. You're the lead portion of that. But every event is a little bit different. But yeah, that's usually it. And
So
then
there are other people that you work with for these events generally, or is it mostly just yourself?
I organize everything with whatever the venue is, whether it's an outreach event or corporate event, whatever I organize it all. Um, I have equipment to cover most of these events, but I do have three other people for every now and again or more. But I have three people on my team who help me routinely. And then
Got
we
it.
have like our outer orbit group, which when they're available, they come and volunteer their time. So, but yeah, so that's how that usually works. But having a team of people that can assist is helpful. Um, I don't I do ask. It's like, hey, we're doing this. A lot of people do it like myself when I got started. We just do it because we love doing it. Um, Now, the corporate side of things or the private events organizes very similar, except now you're dealing with an event planner, and they are usually really structured. You know the venue, you know the time, you know the place, you know how many people are going to be there. Um, those events are the money makers, because you're
Sure.
not getting hired to be educational. That's a plus that comes with it. You're getting hired as entertainment, something cool and unique that an event planner can pull out of their toolbox. And like a DJ or like a palm reader, which we've had before, or whatever unique experience it is. Um, those you want to approach as your entertainment. And
Right.
that's where more of the income comes in from those events. Um,
Now you're in
those I
Arizona, correct? So
Yeah, so we take
how
advantage of the weather and stuff like that. So.
how far have you traveled to do this stuff?
The furthest ones I've done under my own banner for Focus are 2 to 3 hours one way. Like we did one for Lamborghini earlier this year in the fall in Sedona at a really high end resort. Um, and yeah, you had the structure, you had the place, you knew when to be there, but yeah, you're just there as entertainment. But usually with an event like that, um, I have it
Well, I'm
figured
just
out
gonna
to
say it
where
now. You're cheating because you get way too many clear nights, and I always have to plan up a backup plan as to what
yeah,
I'm gonna do if I don't have a clear sky. So how often is it like not usable from like a sky perspective?
we did 30 events this year and I didn't have to cancel one.
Wow. Wow, that's
So
awesome.
we take advantage of it. I have another friend of mine in Sedona. He has a contract with most of the resorts up there. He's booked every night of the year.
Okay.
Yeah, he makes bank doing this stuff. But his personal life is a lot different than mine. He has the time availability to do it,
Great.
but he is out almost every night. Now, we do have backup plans. If I had to cancel one, maybe we did have to cancel one this year. I don't remember. Some of them just fall off the calendar because it doesn't
For
follow
whatever
through
reason.
for
Right.
whatever the reason is. Um, Maybe one or two we've had to postpone or cancel. If we can postpone and move the date, then we'll do that. If that's not possible, then we'll just cancel it. And if it's a corporate event and they've paid ahead of time, then they just get a refund. We do have a cancellation policy we have in place
Got it.
if weather affects it. Um, I do have a meteorite display that we can bring out as an alternative, which is really popular for like education events, but for corporate stuff, not as much.
Sure.
So you offer what you have,
And
and if they want to go with it,
my coloring activities probably won't fly at a corporate event.
no.
From like an education standpoint, oh, here's some coloring activities to do, and
Sometimes
your
they still want you to
kindergartner,
come out because it's just interesting, and maybe you'll
right?
get something. We try to work with, or I try to work, if I know the weather's looking sketchy, I will tell them about 48 hours in advance, being like, hey, it's not looking great. Because normally by the time we're in a 48-hour window, you can kind of figure what the weather, for the most part, is going to look like the night before, unless it's a weird weather system. Um, and we'll work with them, be like, hey, it's not looking great. What do you want to do? And we'll let them decide what they want to do. It's a lot easier to deal with cloudy situations on an educational event
For sure.
because, like I said, oh, we can still come out. We'll bring meteorites. We can still make it fun and interesting for the attendees. Corporate stuff, if they can't see, a lot of times they'll just scrap us and we'll go on to the next thing.
So you're gonna have to like come up with some sort of singing career that kind of interlace it, right? And you can sing
Yeah.
astronomy based
Yes.
songs or something, and make up when you can't see what's going through your telescope. Okay,
Exactly.
that's kind of interesting because I have the opposite. I think I probably have 30 events and maybe one of them actually works up here in Pennsylvania. That's been tough, and it's hard. And what we've found, at least with the outreach stuff to the public, is like people still show up.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be like raining outside, and they'll show
Oh,
up, and
yeah.
so we found we can't cancel with little notice. We can't cancel because they're going to show up, and then they're like, well, where are you guys? Where are you? So
Yeah.
we have to show up anyway. And so what we've
We
had to do is we've had to find places. This is my astronomy club that I went with for 6 years. We had to find a place that had an indoor facility, that had a place where you could sit, and close enough to the public that they're going to actually come. So it's not
Mhm.
ideal sky conditions. You're in light pollution. Um,
Yeah.
and there, it's great to want to go to the darkest skies and in the middle of nowhere, but nobody's going to show up. So it's challenging when you're doing public outreach to just get that perfect,
I've had
experience.
to preface that with people, before, where it's like, "Well, I wanna come out." It's like, "Okay, what I need you to understand," especially because 'cause I've had people ask about starting their own business like Focus is, um, I have to remind people, it's like, "You're not there for you.
Right.
You're there for other people." And like you said, you're not in good skies. Very rarely are you in good skies. And you can't show up, whether it's education or especially corporate events, and be like, well, the sky sucks, so we're not going to do anything. It's like, no, we hired you to come here to do this. And you figure it out. It's like, well, the skies are terrible. Okay, there's the moon, there's some planets, there's some bright stars. You just stick with your guns and work with it. And if you just happen to get to a good sky, hooray. So,
That's why I don't run a channel based on purely astrophotography. It's like I don't have the time, and when I do have the clear skies, it's like, well, I've got something else going on tonight, and it never works out, or maybe I want to just enjoy it for myself for a night.
mhm.
It's difficult when we start to overlap hobbies and businesses, and
Yep.
I mentioned to you right before we got on here that things were starting to feel like here on the podcast, just a lot of effort going towards preparation instead of just enjoying
Mhm.
it. So it's important if you're ever thinking about, as you're listening to Kevin and talk about this stuff, like this takes effort, and it's not always um, you know as fun as just going out and doing it. So
There's some days where you just, like, you've done the podcast. I mean, you've been to NEAF and interviewed people. I do our webcast on Skywatcher. There's some days that you're just not on, where
yep.
it's like, I'm not feeling it. Whatever's going on. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you're just not in the mood. But there's some days where it's like, I'm just not
And then you're out in front of
into.
people.
Yeah,
You're
you've got
on.
to be on. I've talked to my buddy Trevor Jones at Astro Backyard about this. People just kind of expect you to be on all the time, and if you're not, they're like, "Well, what's his problem?" It's like, dude, I'm a
Right.
person too.
Yep.
I can't tell you every day, like, why I'm not feeling it, but some days you're just not in the pocket that you need to be in, and you're just a person. So,
You drift in and out of it pocket. Yeah. It's
mm-hmm.
it's it's a relative term. Yep. So one last thing with like the preparation, you've got two very, very different telescopes that you use. Um, so can you just tell us like what those two telescopes are and why I was in? We had a Facebook conversation about this. Like,
Yes.
why in the world do you have these two very different telescopes, and how do you know which one you're going to use at a particular place or night?
Yeah, those are
You
just
know,
the two that
gear
are on.
problems are, by the way, gear. Sorry to interrupt. Gear problems are a later thing that starts to happen when you've got too
Yeah,
many things to choose from. So don't let that part be, scary to you. But Kevin's got some really cool gear, and I'm
I've
interested to
got
know why he chooses to use what he uses.
a lot of stuff. But I work for Skywatcher too, so telescopes kind of accumulate after a while, whether I buy them or they come from work or something we're working on. We obtain stuff because for different things, but then the benefit is I get to use them at my disposal. Um, but yeah, the two main telescopes that are currently used in rotation are the 28-inch f3.3 Dob, which was custom built specifically for outreach. Its nickname is the Large Aperture Outreach Telescope.
Oh wow!
That I've long time ago, I was at a star party and there was a gentleman. His name's Peter. I don't Arganzano. He's an amazing observer. I don't know where Peter went, and if he's watching this, thanks, Peter. He was so open with his 25-inch obsession. We were at a star party. I was this kid with a 10-inch Dob and got to look at Orion through it, and it was burned a hole in the back of my head. So that's where the aperture addiction kicked in. But I've noticed over the years that everyone who's ever had a really big Dob, A, you remember the image because it's burned in the back of your head.
Yep.
And they're so open and welcoming with their stuff. Like they want to share it. It's their pride and joy. They want to share it. And I've always wanted to be able to give back on that level too, because when you look through a telescope, it's an experience. Well, I
Yes.
want that experience to stick with you. And the best way I have found is to burn it into the back of your head with as much light as possible. Um, so I like using the big bad equipment, and it does get costly, but they're investments. To me, they're tools, and they are not something that I just obtained overnight. It's
Right.
built up, and the collection has rotated all the time. So the 28-inch is the big one. And that took 5 years to make, 3 years to do the mirror. My buddy Scott at Star Arizona designed and helped me build all that. It was crowdfunded. I did sell some of my own stuff to help fund it. Worked with some of my friends' nonprofits to get pieces donated. It was a big puzzle to make it happen. So now that's an active rotation. It doesn't come out to every event, especially like the corporate events where alcohol can be involved, and 6-foot ladders in the dark with alcohol is not a great combination. And I don't want to test my liability insurance. So I have to kind of read the room on which events that scope goes to. So that's the biggest one and probably will always remain the biggest. Anything bigger there was a lot of thought that went into making that portable and usable.
And that
The
that goes
next
around in a
one,
trailer, correct? Like you have a
yeah,
trailer that you pull it all with.
it has a 5x8 box trailer, which if you're getting a big Dob, that's part of the expense that you need to pay attention to is
For
how do you
sure.
move it. But I started with a 10-inch Dob for Dobs, and then I got saved up and got a 16, and that was like my scope for years. And then a buddy of mine was selling his 20-inch Obsession locally, so I jumped from 16 to 20. I actually kept the two of them together. Found I wasn't using the 16, but used the 20. And then once I had the 20 for about a year or two, that's when it's like, I think it's time to make the jump. I finally had a house and stuff, so I had the foundation to house a scope like that. And that's where I started searching for glass and came across the 28-inch blank, thanks to Mike Lockwood. And a lot of things fell into place, but it was a labor of love to make that thing possible. And I do not want to do it again because it was a process. So
We,
that's the
we
big
had
guy.
Scott. We had Scott from Star Arizona on a previous podcast just recently, and he's a great
Oh,
guy.
nice. Yeah, Scott's
Great guy.
awesome. Very
Awesome
quiet, but
conversation. So
he's
if you
funny
haven't,
when you get to pry him open a bit. So
Yeah. So if you
But
haven't
he's
heard
a
that podcast, definitely check that one out because the amazing conversations that kind of just arise from talking to these people that have been doing this for so many years and like just the depth of experience that they have is unbelievable.
Scott's incredible with his knowledge of optics and design and the things he comes up with. So Scott is a wealth of information. Um, and he's a great optician as well. So he did a great job on the mirror. I mean, it was the biggest mirror he's done to date. It's f3.3. It's a cellular mirror, so it was a very different animal, and he got it to 1/7 of a wave across the whole
Wow.
primary, which is very nice. So that's the big scope. Um, the second one that's in active rotation usually. So I have a lot of little scopes, like 6-inch down, but there's my two most impressive ones that are used for events are the 28 and then the Stellar View 180 triplet APO. That replaced the Esprit 150, which I've had. I still have it. It hasn't seen light in a while. But yeah, the 7-inch worked out. Got one of those from Vic. Thing is a freaking powerhouse of a telescope. There is no arguing with a 7-inch triplet, especially one of Stellar View's. And that comes out to most of the events because it's convenient. I really like refractors because they're convenient, they're low maintenance. I don't have to deal with collimation, and they're
Right.
fairly easy to lug around. The 180 is pushing it.
Definitely is pushing it.
Yeah, it's 45-pound tube. But it's never a slouch. It's impressive. It looks like a telescope. It draws people in.
What kind of
It's on
mount
an
are you?
EQA RH from Skywatcher currently. For the love of God, if someone could come out with a strain wave mount big enough to hold that thing where I could axe the counterweights, I would. The EQ8s are amazing, but at the end of the night, it's like I don't want to lug 60 pounds of
That's
counterweights in a 50-pound head. And
that's kind of where I'm getting to, man. And I actually just talked to Vic because I have the 130,
mm-hmm.
the SVX 130, and I had my previous job when I had an observatory, I had the 152 from Stellar View, and I can't believe you're doing star watches with a 180. Like
It's
you're saying how convenient and portable it is, and I'm thinking, holy moly.
yeah,
I
it's
guess compared to the 28, that's pretty small
yeah, the
and portable.
28 I think is easier in a way because the 28 is usually loaded and ready. By the way,
Right.
if you ever want to come over here, the 28 is under lock and key inside an armed garage with cameras. So you're not just going to roll up to my house and pull the trailer away. I've had the trailer robbed once from an
Oh
event
no.
that was left overnight. The 28 wasn't taken or hurt, but they took about 20 grand worth of other stuff out of there.
Oh my.
So that's another thing when you're doing events, you want to be strategic about your equipment. And it's special. If I'm doing an event where we're staying overnight somewhere, I have to be very aware and cautious about how that's being stored. And so there's security that's been gone through now to make sure the investments of all these tools are protected, but you want to be careful with that.
Unfortunate that that's a requirement, but I
Yeah.
completely understand. And I've worked with equipment over the years that wasn't even mine. Working as a teacher, and I'm trying to make sure that things don't walk off.
Yeah. It's
And
with anything.
it's a lot to manage on top of trying to do the outreach on top of it. So yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Um,
But those are the two main scopes. Like I said, I have other smaller instruments. Like there's a little Takahashi 60 down on the floor. Usually that doesn't come out on its own. Um, I usually have smaller telescopes paired with the larger ones to complement them. So like on the Stellar View 180, I don't run a finder scope, but I do have a Takahashi 76 piggybacked on that, which is way overkill. But the reason I have the Takahashis is I've always wanted a Takahashi. So I was finally in a position where I could get one, and it kind of just accumulated. But the Takahashi fluorite doublets are my favorite because they're incredibly sharp, but they're incredibly lightweight. I think the 76 is like 6 pounds. So
Okay.
um, I like them because they're convenient and they just work well. Um,
Did you do the eclipse?
yes.
Is that what you used, or did you use a solar
No,
scope only,
the
or what?
Eclipse was a work event for Skywatcher, so we were out
Got
there
it.
with a lot of our own Skywatcher gear. Um, I shot this year's Eclipse with the Esprit 150. That was actually the last time it was out in April. The Esprit 150 with the reducer, I think, is what I shot that with. But we had to truck a ton of stuff out there because it's a Skywatcher event. So we were flying all Skywatcher gear at that point.
Got it.
So, which
Yeah.
are no slouch either. So,
Yeah, I
but
shot.
yeah,
I did visual observations with Celestron Evo 8, and I did uh most of everything else was done with like a camera and lens,
mhm.
with just my DSLR or my mirrorless, I guess. But man, what a great event. Did
Yeah,
you guys
it
have
was
good clear skies for that?
we lucked out. It wasn't perfectly clear in the portion of Texas that we were in, but it was clear enough to enjoy the whole thing. I'm glad we were able to do it, but we skirted by clouds and stuff like that. But we lucked out majorly on
Yeah, because it
that.
was hit or miss
So
for people in Texas, right?
yeah, yes. If you were much further south from us, like we're talking 30-minute drive, nothing. They were done. Um, so we really lucked out on that one. But yeah, that was all Skywatcher gear because I have to represent the money making brand for
Yeah.
me. So
Kind of changing pace here a little bit. We're talking about preparation, we're talking about gear. Um, how do you, and you said the moon is something that you try to focus on for the education because it's easy to see,
mhm.
and you can guarantee that they're going to see something that they can recognize and be like, yes, that's what I'm
Yeah.
looking at. But when you're doing a corporate event, especially, you want to make sure that the objects you're trying to show people are very obvious to them at some level, I would imagine. Now,
Yeah.
your benefit of being in Arizona cannot be dismissed, especially if you're in darker areas. But like, how do you choose an object? What's the criteria that you kind of put in place for yourself?
It's just kind of happened over the years of doing outreach that you kind of figure out, especially by season, which targets tend to work best in the worst locations. Because right now, as a lot of us know, the springtime sucks because there's no bright deep sky targets and there's no planets that are generally visible right now in the spring to early summer. Um, those events get a little hard. So when it comes to targets, it's just sticking to the bright, well-known stuff. Usually, the brightest Messier objects, um, like M13, M31, M15 this time of year. And if we're in dark enough location, we'll do Andromeda, M81 and 82. The big stuff like that. If there's a cool star, something that's got some cool, like Alberio is a good one. We'll do Polaris occasionally. T Lyra is one of my favorites because it's a carbon star. Something that's got a little bit of an interest to it, we'll stick to. But if the planets and the moon are up, then you're
Do you
golden
let
at
the
that point.
objects, I mean, speak for themselves? Like, what are you saying, doing to keep it entertaining? I don't know. Is there a big difference between like what you would be talking about with an educational versus like a more corporate or public or private, I should say, Star Watch?
Usually, educational events will do like a star tour ahead of time with the laser pointers if it's clear enough and it's organized that way. I will say, if you're doing outreach events, that's a great time to organize your group and go over safety in the dark as well. Because a lot of people are like, well, they're just going to touch my telescope and they're going to move it. Well, we've never really had that problem. I mean, people grab stuff, but you're not going to break it. They're usually afraid of even touching the scopes.
Right.
Um, but Doing a presentation, well, I've seen people do PowerPoints. I try to just keep it straight sky laser pointer kind of thing, pointing out here's the basic constellations, here's how we become acquainted with the night sky, here's where some things we're going to see tonight are. So you're kind of laying the foundation of what they can expect when they come to the telescopes. And then before being released to the scopes, because usually when we're doing the talk, our team is also finalizing alignments and collimation, and they're doing all the pre-prep for their scopes to make sure we're ready to go. This is usually on a larger public event scale. But during those presentations ahead of time where you can talk about who you are, what's up in the sky, what to expect, then you can go into, well, why do we use red lights? And why do you have glow tape on the ladders? And how do you navigate through the star field of the telescopes safely? And after that, they're like, oh, okay, so all of your ladders have glow tape. Only put your hands where the glow tape is. If you touch the telescope, you're going to move it, which will mean, you know, more time in line. And then it's going to take more time for you to see it. And, you know, you can go over and educate people about why. I hate going to an event and you just hear someone from the group tear someone apart because you touched my telescope or you turned a white light on. You're not discovering supernovas or some distant spectra. Right. Like you're downtown with your C8, calm down. So
Yep.
It's, you're here for them, but they need to respect that this is your gear, this is your time. But if you make the effort, a couple minutes to just go over safety protocol. I mean, when you go to Disneyland, you hear it over the intercom, like, please keep your hands and arms inside, or on a plane, sure. Here. It's the same thing. They're new. They don't know. And if they turn on a white light, God forbid, it's a public event. They don't know. But now just instead of ridiculing someone, you're there to teach and educate. So that's your time to be like, hey, next time, turn the flash off, or hey, maybe keep the light down, because if you get the light up, it makes it harder for you to see. That's an education moment where you can bring them higher up into your level. It's like, oh, cool. And we've had people show up from other groups that are like, we went there and they just yelled at us. And that's happened a lot, which doesn't do our little tiny hobby any good, because you're scaring people. We already have crappy telescopes scaring people away. And then you get that and you go to an event and you scare people away because you're not warm and welcoming. And I think a lot of us at times, we forget what it's like to be a beginner. Yes. You get jaded being in it. So I try to keep that in the back of my mind, is like, we have to remember that there was a time that none of us knew why you needed a red flashlight or why you should keep your flashlight down. But we have to be realistic too, that they're not going to come prepared with everything. So doing a small presentation ahead of your event gives your team time to get ready, gives you time for them to get to know who you are, and then gives you time to educate them on the safety protocols of being around the telescopes. And your event goes so much more smoothly with doing that. Corporate events are a little bit harder because you don't have that a lot of times. So you have to go out of your way to mark everything. Like we have right now is a great time if you want to buy them. I bought strands of red Christmas lights, just straight red lights. They're on the electrical cord reels. And that's another thing that we offer, where it's like, well, we have safety lighting that we can bring out for our events, and we can mark trip hazards, and scopes have red lights on them. So we've taken a lot of that. Sorry, I'm segueing off of what you were asking.
No, it's fine. This is how we get into conversations that we didn't plan on that end up being the best. So keep going.
Yeah, but over the years, we've kind of learned how to keep people safe. So we have like 24-hour military glow tape on the tripods. Some of us have it on the counterweights, trip points, places
These
that you
are
could
all
get hurt.
Failures, by the way. What you're describing is all things that you've failed at and realized you need solutions for. So absolutely relevant to this conversation. 100%.
Points. But over the years, we've found out like, hey, I need to keep an extra hand controller in the box, because when you're out doing, I have 10 events next month booked right now. So that's more than some people get out in a year. So the equipment's getting used a lot, and we try to maintain it, but you should have a backup hand controller or a cable if that dies. Mark your
Oh, the
trip
cables
points
are
on your
worst.
tripod. Cables are terrible. Um, avoid Wi-Fi devices because you've got a bunch of phones around. They're jamming everything. Um, all my ladders have 24-hour glow tape on them to mark where you can put your hands, and we use a big, powerful black light flashlight to charge it before an event. It just makes it easier where it's like, just put your hands where the glow tape is. Done. No conversations further. And then if we're in a really dark location, like I have one resort that we're on contract with, it's very dark out there. We mark where the trip hazards are. We make a path with the light so you know where to go and how to be safe. They're all red. But yeah, that's just been, hey, next time we are out here, it might be nice if we had this or this. And like you said, they're all little failure points where you start to refine it. And that's how your gear builds up over the years. You're like, well, why do you have this telescope to go up on a, you know, third story balcony to do an event? It's like, because someone asked me to do it. And
Yep.
now we're equipped to do it. So there are all those little failure points that over time have built up.
Yeah,
So.
rooftop venue is probably not where you're bringing the 28.
No, I had a resort that we did in Sedona earlier this fall, and that's what they asked. They're like, "Hey, we want you to up on top of this roof, and there's a spiral staircase to get up there." Okay. Most of my gear is heavy and large, so this is right when the Skywatcher strain wave mounts were coming out. So I got my sample just in time. It was like, oh my God, this saved the day because I can get it up there. But you have to work with people if they're requesting certain gear from you, because I list the equipment on the websites for me if you want to pick what's coming. But we also have to be like, hey, if it's a rooftop, we're limited to these things. I can't
Yep.
get the big guys up there because there's no way I'm hauling this up a little staircase. So. Oh,
So
you were asking originally. Sorry, you were asking like, how do we deal with the conversation around the telescopes? Though, there's an astronomer at every telescope. It's usually their own gear. Occasionally, I'll have someone run one of my scopes if it's for whatever reason. But 90% of the time, it's their own equipment. I just kind of let everyone do their own thing. But we tell you what the object is and how far it is and some cool things about it. At a large event, you don't have as much time with your guests. I do find you do get little groups. You've probably seen this who are like really into it and they kind of grasp onto you and want to know more. And then we'll start diving deeper into the conversations. If it's a more advanced group, like we're working with adults and not so much kids, and we're on a star, I'll talk to them about how elements are formed inside of a star and starting to get deeper into the science of it and folklore, and they love that stuff. But it's very, you kind of have to read the room on how your group is interacting with you. If they're really interested, go down the rabbit holes, show them what's up in the sky, talk about the folklore. They love all that. If they're just kind of there doing their thing and they don't care, then just move on to the next person in line. Yeah, it's pretty much the same for both events. It's just you kind of have to ratchet down what you're talking about depending on the age and interest of your group.
So when, from what you've talked about, you're doing mostly visual observations, but I know
I do have
recently
cameras though, so
you do have cameras. Yeah. So how is astrophotography and in more particular, like the more outreach focused slash consumer grade smart telescopes, how do you see that kind of like working its way, or already is working its way into what you're doing for these events? And um, how do you think that's going to play out for you?
yeah. So I got seriously into astrophotography right around the time I moved back to Arizona from LA because I realized that I think we all know the writing's on the wall. Astrophotography is like the king of astronomy right now. That's where all the interest is. So from our Skywatchers perspective, it's like I need to start investing my time and understanding on how do I make this work? And why is this camera this? And so I got into astrophotography. And then from there, it's like, well, how can I utilize this for events? So I'd say about 2017, late, yeah, 2017, somewhere in there, I started incorporating astrophotography into outreach events, particularly under highly light polluted locations. I would
Yep.
use one of our little Skywatcher 80 EDs and a monochrome camera and 3 nanometer imaging filters and cut through the light pollution. We were just doing live stacking, which I just called live imaging. That's how it started. And that worked really well, and it still does. And an H alpha filter and a monochrome camera just cuts straight through all of that. But at the time, we were using a Paramount Mighty. We had to have the batteries for that. I had to have power for the monitors, so we had a generator out there, and it all works really well. It's great. It's a lot of freaking work to lug all that out there. And there's been some events in the past couple of years where we've gotten paid for a corporate event to bring this stuff out. You'd be amazed how many people don't care. It's just, well, I see it on a screen. I see Hubble. I see James Webb. They're like, well, where do I look? And it's like, well, it's on the screen. They just glaze over and walk away. They want to look through it. Now, I know some other groups out here that basically make their living off of live imaging, and you kind of just have to figure out what your signature is and what works for you. And that's only something you can answer and what is going to benefit you. But I've started pushing away from live imaging because it's a ton of work. And as we talked about earlier, so many things can go wrong. It's normally the cable.
Yep.
But so many things will go wrong. And I just kind of shelved a lot of that because I even charged more for it, like a lot more, because of the headache and the amount of failure that could happen with an imaging system. It's like, if you think it's complicated to go in your backyard and try imaging, try setting up that whole rig and being ready to go by like 7 o'clock for an event, and then running for 2 hours and then tearing the whole thing down and leaving. And
no, thank you.
It's a lot of work. So we kind of shelved it unless it was very special, specific events. There's an event we've done before called Camp with a Ramp up in northern Arizona, which is for kids who have spinal cord injuries. So they're wheelchair bound or paralyzed.
Right.
So the cameras were highly beneficial. So for special stuff, the cameras make sense. However, in the last couple of years, there's smart telescopes have started to take over that area. So I got a C-Star, an S50 from ZWO, and was like, well, this is really cool. And for some of those special needs events, the C-Star, now our team, I think, has like 3 or 4 of them. They're not mine. A lot of us have our own C-Stars. They've been great because it makes it super convenient. They're nowhere near the performance of our big monochrome cameras and everything, but to be able to just pop it out, turn it on, and go to work is very, very helpful for special need groups.
Personally did both, and both on the same exact object too, because then you can be like, your eyes aren't going to see all of this.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're looking at, and this is the detail that you know can get with a camera, and the color that you can pull out of these deep sky objects with a camera that your eyes are never going to see, but this is what you're looking at through the telescope. And I think it provides the imagination for these people who don't know what these things look like, the ability to like maybe see it better, or even just fill in the blanks, like, and allow them to see it better. Because for example, I was looking at Mars at opposition during COVID, and it was one of the closest Mars oppositions that we were going to see in our life.
It was awesome.
And I was looking at Mars, and I was like, no way. Really? Am I seeing what I think I'm seeing? Am I seeing a polar ice cap? I had to look at it on my phone, and I'm like, holy crap, I am. Because I looked at it on my app. I looked at it on Sky Safari, and I'm like, yes, I am looking at the polar ice caps of Mars. And I wasn't sure. And I'm, an informed background, this is what I do every day type of person, not some person who's looking through a telescope for the first time. So I really think it's important for them to get that like secondary confirmation that what they're looking at is what they're actually supposed to be looking
Yeah.
at. You know,
Well,
especially if
and
it's dim.
doing both lets them see both sides of the spectrum, where it's like, this is visual, this is imaging, and this is what the difference is. And to be able to see that, I think engages people.
But the ease of use, like you said, is so important because I've done the hard way. And you know, I'm actually doing some work to, just volunteering my time to some of my former colleagues working with some of the equipment from my previous job, and I'm going to give them the same advice. You know, like let's go to those more smart telescope types things for the purpose of imaging, and let's stick to the visual observation in the big scope so that you can get that dual experience and that the level of complexity that I was able to achieve isn't necessary for them to continue to operate because you know, it took years for me to get there. They needed to work tomorrow. And
Yeah.
that's what these new scopes are going to provide. And it's really cool when you can say to somebody like, hey, you know, that's a $350 piece of equipment that can get you that same exact thing on your iPad
Yeah. People are
from your
blown away
backyard.
with it. It's
Right.
like, we'll have the 28-inch out. I've got military night vision that goes on that thing. It's phenomenal. Obviously, I have to follow the government restrictions on using night vision, so it does not come out all the time. If you're going to buy one, please be aware of what ITAR restrictions are. And we'll have the little stupid little C star next to my. It's a $50,000 system if you were to price it all out, and the C star is like, no problem. It's this
Yep.
dinky little camcorder looking thing, and it plows right through it.
It's
And
unbelievable.
people are like, "Whoa, well, how much does this little thing cost? Like $500?"
Yep.
What? And now they have the S30, which is coming out for three. We have one on order because it's like, well, why not? We have eyepieces that are more expensive than this thing, and but it engages people and it gets people in the hobby. And it's hard because I work for Skywatcher, but I also run my own outreach program. You have to play both sides of the fence there for me, where it's like I have to represent the brand, but we can't turn our eye away from the amazing advancement that our competitor has brought out.
Right.
And bravo, it pushes
It
us
moves the
forward.
whole industry forward.
It
It
does,
really
and it needs
does.
to exist.
Yep.
Now, very recently, I finally got my hands on an Origin from Celestron. The one issue I have with C Star is they're not very impressive instruments to see.
Yes.
They're just like, it looks like a camcorder, if half our generation even knows what a camcorder is at this point. But yeah, for a school, no problem. Corporate events, it's not impressive. I mean, it's impressive to see what it does, but it's not
Yep.
physically impressive. An Origin, on the other hand, is a very impressive piece of kit. It looks like a telescope. It's a thing.
Yeah, if I showed
We've
up as a
started.
wedding videographer with my phone, you
Yeah.
know, it
Yes.
probably would be like, "Whoa, where's your gear?" You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Origin is a very nice instrument. And if you're an organization or an educator on a serious level, the Origin is a pretty interesting piece of equipment to have. They are pricey, and I do have a hard time wrestling with, is Origin or C Star a better fit? I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying some of this, but they're just different price brackets for different people. They both perform well, but the Origin is a more impressive piece of instrument for us to use. So I could bring that to a corporate event and be like, wow, that was cool. But I am moving forward. Origin has become our default smart scope because of that reason. Now we do have the C Stars available. Those are more for like our special need groups, but I have no plans unless you really need the highest resolution we're able to produce on bringing the old live stack setup back with the
No.
Paramount or the ASI Air. The Origin does all of it, and I just have to flip a dumb little switch.
Yep.
I haven't tried casting it to a larger monitor yet,
Well,
but
I have, and I have a video that's on my channel here that you could watch. And you know, I've worked previously with Celestron, with Origin, just to kind of look over it. And it is, as you said, a flip of a switch. It turns on, it finds everything, just as so does C-Star. But I was able to come down here to my studio, put it on my TV, um, look at it on the TV, mess with everything just from my iPad, just right to
Yeah.
my TV. It was fairly seamless. The thing I think I like about this overseas star over some of these unistellars and things like that is that it is upgradable. The camera can be
Yes.
removed and put a new camera in. As technology advances, I'm sure there's other components that are going to have to be replaced and such. But the ability to take advantage of optical design is important. Like any lenses, are for like a camera, for example. I can buy a set of lenses and put a brand new camera body on the back of it in 10
Yep.
years, and it's going to perform just as well optically, for the most part. And that to me is what you're buying
Hmm.
with that system, is you're buying the quality of the optics. Uh, Whereas you could probably over that same time period buy a number of C stars to kind of get to the newest of technology and bring yourself up in a different way. And so in the end, it's just, what do you feel is probably achievable now? And how important is it to you to kind of maintain that same upgradability over time, which
Yeah.
is a reality when you're talking about astrophotography. Things are going to change and
Yeah.
get
If you're
get better. This is the least quality we're going to get moving forward,
yeah.
and that blows
If
my mind right every time I say it.
I'd say if you're in the market for live imaging or a smart telescope and you're trying to do on a serious level, either corporate or outreach events, the Origin is the must-have scope. And for all those reasons, it's easily serviceable. So if a camera goes down, you can replace the camera. Battery goes down, you can take care of that. If a C star goes down, what do you do? If the chip dies, what do you
Buy a
do?
new
And
C star.
yeah, which I get they're only $500, but I mean, well, now I got to replace the whole thing. Or yeah, oh, Origin's got a new camera. Oh, awesome! I can just upgrade what I've got. So, and that's a big thing if you're doing events as much as a lot of us out here are doing. You wear the gear down a lot faster than other people might. So being able to service equipment easily, like when we go into monsoon season, late summer here, just like the professional observatories, that's when my team will stop. We're not doing events. It's too hot. It's raining. It's whatever. That's our maintenance time. So I'll take the telescopes apart. That's where you clean them, do everything you need, re-grease the gears, whatever you got to do. But with Origin, that's something that is nice to be able to do. Is I can take the camera off, I can clean it, I can upgrade the cameras, I can switch filters out, whatever.
Right.
C Star is a nice, fun thing to have in the toolbox, but it is not the main live imaging setup. Um, and for all the reasons I just listed,
Right.
fantastic piece of kit to have. I'm glad we have them, but they are not the main tool that comes out to the events because Origin. I mean, I already have people in my group that are looking to get one or two. So we'll probably have a couple of them here in the near future because they're just convenient on all those levels. So.
I've had conversations with people at multiple companies about some ideas, because I've come to the realization that if my ideas are in my brain and don't get out there to this community, like, that's not going to go anywhere. I'm not going to be a manufacturer anytime soon. And so one of the things that I've been hard, pressed to kind of get out there is we need to incorporate AR into some of this equipment, and the optical, um, you know, the Unistellar has the optical eyepiece, and Pegasus now has the optical eyepiece that they're coming
Yeah,
out with,
yeah.
and it kind of blends both worlds. And I kind of feel like the really hardcore visual astronomers are still not going to be okay with it. But I think for the rest of us, and you're kind of in that category, and this is why I want to know your opinion. as a visual astronomer, is that achieving some semblance of a blended experience, or is
Yeah,
it
I
still
think
just not the same thing to you?
the new smart eye that Pegasus is working on, I got to use the prototype. They brought it out to Starfest up in Canada in August. I mean, we saw it at NEAF, but I mean, it was just a thing at NEAF.
Yep.
Where Starfest, we got to see it on a scope and use it. And it's a little, I had mixed feelings about it, and I'm really good. One of my best friends is working on it. Um, it's a different experience from a visual, both imaging and a visual person. For visual, you don't have that like immediate response. Like if you move the telescope, you can see it. You can see it move. Um, where this, it's a camera. It's taking pictures. And for imaging, it's weird because you're looking through an eyepiece. So it really does blend both of those worlds. Um, but I'm excited to get a hold of one at some point because
A
we
thousand
have a
bucks, I
lot of
think, or
nice,
1,500,
yeah,
something like
somewhere in
that.
there. Um, it has a higher resolution sensor than anything on the market with the 533 in there, which is nice. Um, we have a lot of nice telescopes already in the inventory for events. So, I'd like to just pop it on. I
As
can't
you upgrade.
imagine what that thing could do on the 28
Yep.
from a dark sky. Um, but yeah, I think that will be a big tool to have in the case where it's like, well, I don't want to buy a ZWO and I don't want to buy an Origin because I just don't know if I want to commit to a
And
whole system.
when you're
But
done, just pop it out and put your
yeah,
eyepiece
you can
in. Like,
switch
it's
it out and put the
literally
next one in.
right. And not a screw on or anything, just doop, right in like a normal
Yep.
eyepiece, close that down, lock it down, and look through it. I I'm excited to see. And like I can imagine looking at the moon and having it like identify the craters.
That would be
What
really
look
cool.
looking at the stars, and you ask it a question and it pops up a little bubble and a little blurb like how many light years away it is, what the names of the stars are you see in the field, like point out where the ring nebula is. Here it's pointing right at it, and then it pops up a little blurb and gives you an image of what it would look like from the
Yeah,
Hubble
like you
or
said
whatever.
earlier,
Like
you're doing the
it's
augmented reality on there a
yeah,
little bit.
like, it's the
That
potential
would
there.
be There's a lot of potential with Smart Eye, and there's a lot of really smart people working on that thing. To where I think we'll see a lot more come from that vision. Um, I'm curious to see where they're going to go with it because there's a lot of capability that could come out of that.
So Unistellar has come out with a binocular that's doing that too, which is
Oh, I
you
saw those. I haven't played
that's
with
the
them, but
kind of
I
thing I'm
saw the
talking about.
ad.
Yeah.
Those are really, because I mean, how many times do you see people with like, the apps and they're looking up at the sky and stuff? You're already getting augmented reality through that in a way on a digital format. I forgot about the Unistellar binoculars. But
But
yeah,
that's where
those
I
would be
see it
cool.
going. That's where
Because
I
there's a lot
really
of
see it
people that's
going.
just like, well, what is that? It's like, unless you have someone there to tell you, which at an event, yeah, maybe you do, but sometimes you don't, or they're busy doing something. It's kind of cool that you can explore and learn for yourself. But I think that augmented stuff would be kind of neat to see more of. It's just an education tool. So,
Right, right. And have, some suggested content, maybe even that, relates to it. So maybe the Cosmos Safari video on how to find
mm-hmm.
M13, it's amazing that just once, as soon as you connect the telescope to the internet and to just this whole AR experience, I don't know if VR is ever going to catch on. I personally don't find it super exciting, but like to me, um, just picking and choosing when I want to use this kind of technology. This is one of the things I think for outreach, I would really love to see it in my kit,
Mm-hmm.
and just play with it even. Um, so excellent. We are at about an hour and 18 minutes already. So I want to kind of start to wrap this up. Um, so I just kind of want to just go over some of the things that we've talked about. So, in terms of corporate events and private events, compared to your outreach that you do to the public, I'm finding that the themes are, just tell the story, right? and
Yep.
give people an experience that is an educational one, whether that be how to hold on to a ladder properly, or whether that be
Mm-hmm.
what the star is made of and how it forms elements, right? The other thing I'm hearing a lot of is like things change, and you need to kind of be adaptive and understanding that this is a moving target. Is there a message that you would like to share with the community that you feel would be helpful and maybe inspiring to them to share their passion if they're kind of on, as we discussed at the beginning, on that kind of cusp of, I'm not really sure, I'm kind of new at this, I have a telescope maybe, I'd like to do outreach, but I don't feel comfortable quite yet. Like,
Yeah,
what's
just
that
get
message?
involved. Find a group nearby. There's got to be one somewhere, and just get involved and get your feet wet. And if it's like, hey, I really like this, and you start to take off with it, then see how much you can push within your group on like, hey, I want to do this and I want to do that. Um, but don't be afraid to go out there and don't be and spend some time learning. Like if you're going to go to an outreach event, this weekend, for example, you're like, well, I'm new. Well, just maybe research like two objects before you go out for that night that are up right now. So it's like, well, Saturn's up right now, and my little telescope will just say you've got like a C6 or something like that. My telescope can see that. And then maybe pick a deep, and if there's no planets, pick a deep sky object and learn where it's at. Maybe learn the constellation a little bit. Go out in the backyard, mess up a few times, but just learn maybe 2 to 3 objects that you have as your main, middle, and backup target and roll with it. So, on top of that, you're learning the sky, you're learning about your object, and then when you get out there, you've got some foundation so you're prepped on it. And you just keep doing that, and eventually you start learning all these objects in your head of where they're at and how far it is. I can't tell you how many times I've showed people M13 at the Grand Canyon Star Party. Hundreds of people have looked through the big daub at that object. And when people are like, how do you know so much? It's like, when you repeat it 300 times a night for 5 nights in a row, it is burned into the back of your head. So it's like it's 25,000 light years away, 175 light years in diameter. It's about 1 million stars. It's up here in the area of Hercules. Blah 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 blah. It's because it's been ingrained so many times. But there was one time. There's a lot of times where I'm on a new object. I have to pull up my phone and look up Sky
Sure.
Safari and just be like, okay, it's if it's an object I don't look at much, and it's like, well, okay, we'll pick this. I always have my phone and
Right.
Sky Safari open. Sky Safari Pro, I like using that because it's got the most data in it. But I usually look up how far it is, if there is a diameter, and see if there's a couple interesting facts. And sometimes you just have to do it on a whim and be ready to go. And because we try to make sure at events that each telescope is on something different, so you're not getting repeats. I've seen a lot of clubs where you go and it's like 4 telescopes out of 6 are on the moon or Saturn or something like that. It's like,
Yes, the
expand it a
same
little bit.
object over and
Yeah.
over, and I saw that on that telescope 5 seconds ago.
Yeah. It just gets boring for people. And obviously, on large events, maybe you have more equipment than you have realistically available targets. Like if we're on a big event and the moon's up, we usually have one telescope. A friend of mine's very good at doing eyepiece photography of the moon. So he takes your phone and takes a picture through the telescope. People love that.
Yes.
So learn how to do that. But if it's a really busy event and we have enough inventory for equipment, we'll have one do the photography on the moon. You can also look if you want, and the other one's just to look. That way we can get more people through in less time. But if you don't have that, try to make sure work as a team. Like, okay, you have the big scope, so you're going to go after Andromeda tonight. And you have a little scope over here, but it's a wide field scope, so you're going to go after the Pleiades tonight. And we try to work with each other. And if someone, we had a friend of mine who loved the moon, was into Apollo. That's how he got. So we're like, okay, Steve likes the moon and he's great with it. So you're just going to be the moon scope because you know so much about it. So if you know someone who's really good at one thing, maybe let them have that. But work as a
It's funny to
team.
look at. Yep.
Yeah, work as a team to make sure all your telescopes aren't just pointed to the same thing. Because again, you're not there for you, you're there for them. And that's what I would tell serious people who have been in this for a while. It's like, I want to start doing outreach. Okay, just remember who you're here for. It's not really a social get together to hang out with your buddy and ignore the other 20 people waiting to look. But if you're new, just do a little bit of research on a few targets. You know, maybe download an app, learn some stuff, go in the backyard, learn your scope, run it into the ground a few times. We've all done that. Um, but don't be afraid to go out there and just give it your best shot. And eventually, over time, it'll start to really sink in. But if you've already got a telescope and you're interested in going out there and you're nervous about it, 99% of the people who are coming to your event, you are already way ahead of them. You've invested in it, you have the interest, and you have the drive. They will love to hear whatever you have to share with them.
And this is my 17th year as a high school teacher. And one of the things that I think I have personally found is the most powerful thing I can do is just say when I don't know something.
Yeah,
Because
I tell
then
my kids
everything I'm
that.
saying, I'm telling you I understand and know. Because if
Yeah.
I try to just be the prophet of knowing everything, it gets me personal satisfaction, maybe. But when I can say, I have no idea, and that people realize like there's a finite amount of information that even I know about this as somebody who's an expert on it. And I will say that I am an expert on this. Is what I've been doing for 17 years, and I still don't know everything. And that's what I think a lot of people coming into this really feel like they have to be an expert on everything, and there's nobody who is. And if
No,
they try to tell you if they try to tell you that they are, they're doing it for their own personal satisfaction. Right?
yeah, I've
Because
seen this a lot. Maybe you saw this during COVID, particularly in the Instagram side of things. There's a lot of people that kind of came to astronomy with this egotistical approach that I'm going to be famous by being a famous astrophotographer. And they've
right.
all diminished and phased out because why the heck would you come here to make a ton of money or be known for something? It's like the bar is so low here that it's like, dude, just if you're in it for money, you pick the wrong place.
Agreed.
If you're passionate enough, eventually it's like, it kind of just, as you found, it kind of just comes to
Yes.
you. And you should stop working so hard and just enjoy what you're doing. And eventually it just happens. But yeah, like you were saying earlier, you can't know everything. And it's more powerful to be like, you know what? That's a really good question. I have no idea. Let me look it up really quick. Or
Let's look it up together, right?
yeah,
What
let's
does a
look it
good
up together.
source
But
look like? Okay, this is a great source. This is a great source of information. Um, can we close with something that's kind of like, I know, important to you because I've seen some of your posts online. Why is now such an important time? You know, we have people who are seeking out information. They want to know their world. They want to understand. Like we always have had people who are interested in their surroundings and scientifically minded. I'm thinking young people, old people,
Mhm.
everybody. Um, why is it so important that we are doing this outreach? Because I know you're pretty passionate about it. Why do you think that matters?
Yeah, I now more than ever, and that brings back a Carl Sagan quote where we live in a time where our society is built on science and technology, yet so few people know about science and technology. I mean, how many people know how this became a real thing? You know, we've become so jaded with, oh, I just have this, and oh, I can just send them. It's like there was a time where you couldn't.
Well, and how
Someone
does it
had to
all
think.
work? I don't
Yeah,
even
we
think
don't.
I don't I don't know that even some of the experts that work on these devices even know how they work from start to finish. I'd like to
No.
know that person who can tell me how every step in the manufacturing process and every step in the development of software that makes your iPhone run happens. I don't think there's a single person on earth who can do all of that. And that's
Yeah.
scary to know that. And especially with AI and all of the things that are coming around the bend here, where there's this information is at your fingertips, how to differentiate between reality,
Dad, you
how to
nailed it.
understand what you're looking at is coming from a relevant source that makes sense and is backed by scientific research and understanding. And it is important to be able to think through problems still and understand things in your own brain. And not everything can be and should be looking it up online or asking AI question. In fact, if you can have a lot of information up here and you have the aid of AI, now we're talking. Now we've got that synergistic effect where the fact that people who are, and I think this is the case, once again, there's always going to be the people in our world who are motivated, who are interested, who want to learn and know things. And it's very easy to let you go down the doom scrolling, right?
Yeah.
Of how bad this could go. And I think if we do the right decisions here as a society, including our little bit, which is to teach people about their universe, that this opens up so many doors. And for people who are, especially for young people who are trying to take this technology that's going to be in their hands and to incorporate that within what they understand about their universe in their own minds. And to ask those good questions and to know those good resources, I think is important. So I appreciate you. I appreciate the work you're doing. I want to thank you for coming on to the
Well, thanks
podcast,
for
guys. Kevin LeGore, you are doing amazing work, my friend. Focus Astronomy Outreach. Just an awesome organization. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And yeah, I like what you said there, just to wrap that whole thing up, where astronomy for me has taught me a lot of things about life, where it's like, number one, you should be willing to question things. Critical thinking is important. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And the biggest thing for astronomy for me is it puts you in your place. It
Yes, it
shows
does.
you how small and insignificant we are here on our little planet. And when you just see all this garbage online, people making up stories, it's like you just don't want to take the time to understand your place. And so we just make up stuff. And if we could just take a step back, because I'm sure you've probably seen this at events, you could take people from all different walks of life, all different faiths, backgrounds, and you could put them under the night sky. I don't care what political affiliation you are, that completely disintegrates when
Yep.
you put people under the night sky, and they're like, wow. And there's
So
like this seed in our head that people are just like, you know, I should ask more. It just, you start thinking on this very deep rooted thing in the human brain that makes you
I'm
curious.
I'm located near Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and we have a very large Amish community. And when I was doing outreach, I was doing it in Lancaster, and we had some Amish people show up to our events. And man, did they ask some of the most amazing questions.
Mhm.
They're coming from a background that is, basically no cars, no phones, no technology. They're using horses and buggies still, and yet they look through an eyepiece and they ask questions that I think are more meaningful from a time spent on this planet trying to understand what you're looking at. Not even faith-based, just questions. And they were open to everything. And it blew my mind because, I had my caricature living here my whole life of what these people were like.
Mhm.
But like you said, it disintegrated. It was gone. They wanted to know, like, what do we know? What do we know? What is
Yeah.
science telling us? And I was like, wow, these people are really a lot more open to this scientific understanding of their universe than we might think.
Well, and they don't have all the noise of
Yes.
the world buzzing around. That they know it's there, but they like cut that layer out. There's so much crap in the world now, like with AI, and this is fake news and they're wrong, and it's just a constant like finger pointing,
Right.
whatever it is. It's like, if you just would shut up and stop talking and just bring it down. That's what I like the night. the night is calm, it's quiet, the world is at peace finally. And now we can just be like, hey, what's your political affiliate? I don't care. I don't even know what you look like. You're just some voice in the dark.
Yeah.
So everyone looks the same in the dark. I can't see you. So
and I'm just thinking about climbing up that ladder, that 28, looking in the eyepiece still. That's never going to get old. That's never going to get old.
Place. That's a thing. That's a place. If we had the technology, we could go there and think about all the, like, it really falls away when you start looking into space, and it's like, think of what we could do if we just focused on this and tried to, get ourselves out into the deepest waters we've ever imagined. But we're too busy being like, well, it's their fault.
Kevin,
okay, great.
I think we need to have you back on the podcast at some point.
There's a whole other hour and a half conversation.
We could talk about hours and hours worth of these things. So I'm gonna call it a win here. So thank you, and everybody, please keep looking up.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
If you're still listening and like this podcast, please consider becoming one of our Patreon patrons. Memberships start as low as $3 per month, with benefits including opportunities to ask questions of our guests. Also, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing this podcast to help us bring the universe even closer than you think.